So the first thing to probably mention is that our platform we've tried to make as simple as possible. So as Will mentioned, there's a lot of current solutions out there. We want to make sure that we're making use of AI automation to enable teams to much quicker, generate data, mask data, and we do that in a very easy way that isn't too complex. So how we configure and customize this is through workflows. So with workflows, that's really how we define what different data transformation we want to take place. So the typical use cases we have are around generating synthetic data, masking data, and then also subsetting data. You can actually do all three of those in one workflow, on one database, on one application. If we go into generation, we have two different views that you can see a workflow from. There's a more technical view, which is what we kind of call data as a code, which is this view here. And then we also have a more user-friendly UI where you can customize and control the same things. Within this UI view, what you're seeing at the moment is that essentially the schema from that source database after our machine learning models have scanned it. So you can see the columns, the tables, and what's actually happened is that it's automatically picked out one of our transformers to recreate that data in the test environment. Now, it's not only picked out a transformer that is going to generate that data, it's also making sure that that data is going to be relevant and that is within certain ranges. So when our machine learning models are doing those scans on that source data, it's looking at the structure, of course, it's looking at the data types, but it's also doing statistical analysis to understand the different ratios and distributions of data, making sure that when we're generating amounts, when we're generating numbers, that it's consistent and it actually looks realistic to the end user. For example, if we're generating transactions and the highest transaction in production is £1,000, we're not going to be generating £1 million randomly. This again makes sure that we can have production-like data in those non-production environments. Now, of course, this is all completely customizable. The main purpose of Synthesized is to automate as much as possible, whilst essentially allowing unlimited customization of those features. So as you can see within, if I go into account type here, you can actually see that what it's automatically done is it's looked at those distributions of the types of the customer types in the source database, and it's then applied those same ratios to make sure that it's relative and realistic. Having said that, we can come in and we can customize this for edge cases, for negative scenarios, and all things like that. We can also, when we're generating data, control how much or as we can generate as much or little as we need. So I can control at a ratio level, I want 5 times the amount of data for performance testing. I can choose that I want less data. I can also do that at a row level. And what's important to bear in mind is we can do everything either at a global level for the whole workflow, for the whole database, or we can do it at an individual table and column level. So the level of customization we can do is truly amazing. We're also making sure that with our transformers, we're generating really realistic data and data that makes sense and links together. The way we do that is by making our model deterministic. So if I go back to the database view, if I'm looking at first name, last name that I've got in this database, you can see we're using our person generator. Now, what that's going to do is that's going to generate realistic names. It's also going to link those things together. So, for example, the last name will be interconnected with the email, again, to make sure that data looks realistic. And we can customize that and change that based on business rules, based on validation checks, etc. When we're talking about, so generation is one of the capabilities we have and most commonly used. We can also do masking, making sure that you can mask data and use that production data in a safe and compliant way. We can do this automatically using our sensitivity data scan. So what this does is, again, it will use our machine learning models to go off into that source. And it's doing very similar scans to what the other the generation flows are, but it's looking at slightly different things. So it's looking at things like column names. It's looking at the data type as well. It's looking at the table names. It's also looking at samples of data within those columns as well to understand if that data is sensitive. As you can see, it then pulls back a report on which columns it found sensitive. Now, as a user, I can come in here and I can customize these to change for different scenarios. As you can see, this is on quite a small database, but we can do this across thousands and thousands of tables and columns. We also have the option to be able to customize these rules. As synthesized, we recognize that lots of different industries, lots of different regions have different compliance needs. And so the ability to be able to change those either at a organizational level or individual application level is really important. So within here, we can change the different PII rules and you can add your own patterns. And again, that can be at a global level for the whole system or individual applications and projects. Once we've done that data sensitivity scan, we can essentially apply those changes. As you can see here, the data that is selected is clearly PII. I can click apply, and what that does is that automatically updates the code and the UI view to make sure that that data is automatically masked in a compliant way whilst making sure that the structure is still correct and it's still valid. As you can see here, for everything else, it's just marked it as pass-through, and for all of these items, it's applied a masking routine. Now that's great, and that means we can use the data safely within that environment. But what if we've got cases where we've got validation rules, we've got business rules, we've got certain test cases that require, a name to be a certain value, have certain characteristics. We can overlay masking routines with our generation rules to make sure that we can mask things in certain places and then generate and replace with values with realistic data where necessary. As you can see in this flow, if I go to the UI view, you can see that again, we're passing through all the non-sensitive data, but we're actually, instead of just using a masking routine, we're actually using our generators now to replace that sensitive data with more realistic values. And again, this is going to mask and replace things in a deterministic way across the entire, across your entire ecosystem. So within one database, it's going to make sure that referential integrity is maintained through foreign keys, primary keys, and then we can also define relationships as well that don't exist in the database, but also between applications, making sure that where we mask something in one place, we're doing it in the other. We also have full audit logs. So when you run the system, you can get back who ran the workflows, what transformation happened, and which tables they happened on. Now, so far we've spoken about doing generation and masking on relational databases. But as Will and Zoe both mentioned before, applications and enterprise applications such as SAP are a really big challenge. And they're a big challenge because they're not only, they don't only have the issues of relational databases, they have additional complexity. They've got different modules, they have different business logic that have to be applied. We now have SAP native capabilities to be able to make sure we can generate data, mask data, and just do things like data refreshes on SAP environments. I've got a video that I'll show you of this functionality and I'll walk you through it. Within Synthesized, we can now create SAP specific workflows. We can do this within a project and we can configure it with a name as we do any other workflow. We can then select our input and output systems. Now, this could be the same instance and the same system, and then we can select different schemas to generate or transform data in, or we can choose two separate instances. Then this is really where we can apply that SAP specific knowledge. So we can choose different SAP modules to be able to filter that data and transform that data in a specific way. This means that we can not only understand the different structures of the data as we normally do, but actually understand the different columns and things within SAP. We can also choose a data scope, which again is critical for applications such as SAP, where they've not only got master data, but also transactional data as well. And there's a very big linkage there. So we can choose master data, transactional and master data, or everything. Now, on top of that, we can also do time slicing, which is really critical. I'm actually just going to pause this, talk a bit more about that. So within time slicing, this is the ability to be able to pull data from certain points in time out. But critically, there's actually more complexity going on in the background there, which is depending on whether you pick master data or master data and transactional data, It's going to make sure that it's picking appropriate dates from the right locations, from the right modules, so that that data doesn't break and the relationship's maintained. SAP, again, as an example, is very complex, and the smallest things that you change could break the entire system and entire business process. So we can choose time periods like that. We can then also select data protection modes. So as we just showed in a normal masking flow, we can mask sensitive data. Importantly, though, masking sensitive data, this actually again has another level of complexity to it. So we're using our normal machine learning models to do this with the overlaid logic of SAP modules, but we're also making sure that that data we're not masking data that shouldn't be masked. So there are some things which, don't play nice in SAP to masking. So country codes, for example, should never be changed. And our system knows that and makes sure that only the data that should be masked and is sensitive is masked. We can also just choose no masking if we want to just do a data refresh. Now, once we've created our workflow, you'll be presented with the database view. Again, very similar to what you saw earlier. What's happened is, again, you can see all the different columns, all the different tables on the left-hand side. And again, you can see that automatically it's chosen, in this case, I chose masking. So you can see that it's chosen the masking routine appropriate for all those sensitive fields. Now we can look in here and we can see what it's actually done. It's automatically selected all the different characteristics and parameters that are needed to make sure that data not only looks correct, but actually acts valid as well. You can see for the non-sensitive fields, again, in this case, we've decided to do a pass-through. You can also see the data as a code view, as you can in normal workflows, depending if you are technical or non-technical user. This really allows us, in Synthesize, we really believe this is a differentiator because there are some existing TDM solutions for SAP, but they're very specific to SAP, meaning that if you have that within your environment, for the rest of your ecosystem, you have to have another tool or other processes. We really believe that having an SAP native capability is critical and that we can then not only do data transformation on SAP, but also the rest of your ecosystem all in one place. Now, we've spoken about doing data transformations on relational databases and now SAP through the UI. But how does this all actually come together if you've got an existing test automation framework? So we can natively connect into lots of different test automation frameworks, also things like CI/CD pipelines, to be able to kick off our jobs and workflows through your existing pipeline and process. One of the connectors we've recently made is with Tricentis Tosca, and this allows us to do a couple of things. This allows us to be able to not only call workflows and run workflows from within Tosca, but also be able to actually query specific data for each test case and make sure that we can get the right data for the right test cases. Again, I've got a video that I can walk through and show. So in this example, we've got a sample banking application. This is acting as our production database. So within here, we've got customers, we've got email addresses, we've also got accounts and things like that. Very similar to the database view I just showed you within Synthesized. As you can see, we've also got a testing environment at the moment, which has got nothing in it. Now we want to generate clean data into here so that we can actually run our tests on it. So within Synthesized, we've got set up those generation flows and workflows that we want to run to make sure we can get that clean data. Now, what we can do is we can go within Tosca itself, we can actually have and build modules that allow us to call those workflows specifically and run them as part of the existing modules and as part of before you run your test cases. So within here, you can see we are specifying workflow IDs and we can actually run the workflow directly. So once we run the workflow, you'll see that what happens is that Synthesized will open up and you'll be able to see the progress of the job running. As we can see, it's kicked off the job. And if I select here, we can actually see the progress of that job. So we can see the different processes it's going through. It's going to make sure the data source is valid, and then it's going to go through again, doing its dynamic checks to scan the schema and generate the data appropriate. Once the data is generated, we can head back over to our sample application. And if I refresh this, you'll be able to see we've now got real accounts and customers within here. Now, again, this has all been generated from scratch. And importantly, all that data links together. The last section then is just around being able to actually query data directly from test cases. So once we've generated the data in our test environment that we can then use safely, we can then go over to each individual test case and we can actually use smart queries to allow us to not have to hard code values in, but actually pull out data that has certain characteristics. So being able to specify, I need an account that has over £500 and is not frozen, for example, making sure that, again, we're not necessarily beholden to one record, but actually different records we can pull out. Hopefully that showed you what the synthesized platform can do, and that we can not only deal with, relational databases and generate and mask data, also working with very complex systems such as SAP, and also fitting into your entire test automation framework. So with that, I'll hand back to Zoe.